welcome to Christ and Culture. My name is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along today for the discussion. Today we're going to be looking at Brian Greene, the physicist, the famous physicist. This is his book, The Elegant Universe, which I bought a couple years ago, and it explains what is called in physics the string theory. It's a very important book popularizing science. This is what Brian Greene looks like. This is what he looked like about 10 years ago. I think the book here was published about 10 years ago. See, 2003, so actually 17 years ago at the time of this recording. So this has been out for quite a while. He is a science popularizer, and he was recently interviewed in Time magazine, interestingly enough. And this came out in March, early March, and it's an interview where they sat down with Brian Greene and they asked him about some of the deeper questions of life, not just related to physics, but what are the implications of what he is teaching in his books and his popular PBS series. For example, The Elegant Universe. I first ran into Brian Greene on PBS with his Elegant Universe series. I think it's about a 4 to 5 or 6 part series on physics that he goes into explaining many of the different theories in physics, starting with Newton and then dealing with Einstein. And then he also brings in the quantum mechanics and the string theory and all of the different newer discoveries and theories. And I thought that was a really good popularized series where you could understand exactly what is going on in physics today, and because that is a way that science gets out into the popular culture. And Brian Greene now is one of the most important and influential science popularizers on the planet today. So Time Magazine, I have a subscription to Time Magazine. I get it every week or two as it comes in, every week or so. And he was interviewed by a Jeffrey Kluger, and I wanted to cover what he said because, you know, we're thinking about this coronavirus right now. At the time of this recording, we're in lockdown. I'm here in New York State. I'm not supposed to go to certain businesses. They're supposed to be closed, and there's strict quarantine, and especially around New York City. I am not in New York City. I'm quite a ways up, upstate New York. But we are in lockdown. We're dealing with this pandemic. We're trying to so-called flatten the curve. And it's interesting to see what the experts are saying. We're getting a good lesson in what the experts say and what the experts then say tomorrow and what the experts then say the next day and so on. And a lot of times when you're dealing with scientists, when you're dealing with medical experts, when you're dealing with the so-called specialist in their field, they have changing opinions as data comes in. So it's really difficult for the general public to actually know what's going on right now with this epidemic because, for example, we were first told that don't even bother wearing face masks. It doesn't really help you. But then now we're told after a month or a month and a half or so, oh, definitely wear a face mask. That will help the situation quite a bit. It will prevent you from getting a heavy dose of the coronavirus. Even if you do get a small dose of the coronavirus in your nostrils, or if it were to go into your mouth or around your face, it would help to have a mask on because it would cut the volume of the coronavirus and then enable your defense systems, immune systems to fight that off. So now we're being told to wear the mask, even though we were told a month and a half ago not to wear the mask by the experts. We were also told the transmission rate by the experts, that's proven to not be exactly what they were saying. And on and on and on down the list, the experts weighed in. They were talking with certainty They were talking authoritatively, and now come to find out a lot of that early information was wrong, and a lot of it was actually false. And so we have a situation where our faith, which is good, in experts is being questioned. And it's a good, healthy process. We're actually seeing the so-called experts being exposed for what they really are. And that is, they're trying to make guesses. They're trying to make informed guesses. They're trying to come up with theories and models. We've heard a lot about models, the transmission of the coronavirus and so forth. But we're also seeing that they don't have all the answers, and they're not as authoritative, and they're speaking very confidently, but the actual facts don't support a lot of their confidence. So I think it's good that the general public is now exposed to the simple truth that the experts don't have all the answers. Well, Brian Greene is an expert in physics. And it's interesting that this article writer, Jeffrey Kluger, exposes some of Brian Greene's personal beliefs based on his scientific knowledge, and they're very depressing, they're very bleak, they're very nihilistic. And a lot of the science popularizers, they want to put this really happy, optimistic, upbeat, positive spin on their scientific theories, and try to tell everybody this is exciting, this is inspiring, and the study of the universe and everything is really something that borders on almost religious awe as we understand the universe. But then when you get right on down to it, and you really look at what Brian Greene really believes based on his scientific understanding of the universe, you're going to find out that he is an atheistic nihilist who really doesn't offer any hope. And so it's good that we get to the bottom of what a lot of these scientists are actually putting forth there. They're putting a spin on it in their popular presentations, but when you talk to them privately, they actually don't have much hope. They actually don't believe there's any meaning or purpose in life. And it's a very bleak outlook. So let's look at this article, and then I'll make some commentary on it, and I'll show you what I mean. The article starts out, string theorist Brian Greene wants to help you understand the cold, cruel universe. That's the title of the article, the cold, cruel universe. And we'll understand exactly what that means once we get into the article, because Brian Greene, for all of his optimism and upbeat, positive presentation of science, is actually going to give a pretty depressing, bleak, nihilistic, hopeless, meaningless, purposeless description of reality here. It starts out, if you're feeling a little dreamy about the universe, here's a pro tip. Don't tell Brian Greene. That guy can chill your cosmic buzz fast. I recently swung by the office of the Columbia University theoretical physicist full of happy, giddy questions and came away pretty much empty. So he had listened to Brian Greene on PBS, his specials, his series, probably saw the Elegant Universe series like I did. He's read his books, and the way it's presented is upbeat and positive, like I said before. But then he went to talk to Brian Greene, and there's a completely different dark side to Brian Greene, and this is what he is writing about. He says here, is there such a thing as a natural moral order? I wondered. Not in this universe there isn't. What about a purpose to the universe? Then the reason the whole 13.8 billion year old shebang with its hundreds of billions of galaxies and trillions of planets happened in the first place? Nope, Greene says, no such purpose, adding, and that's okay. Maybe for him it is. In other words, Brian Greene, this man came to him, this science writer came to him, and asked Brian Greene, is there anything such as objective moral standard in the universe that you can tell as a scientist? And Brian Greene says, no, there's no morality. There's no objective morality out there. And then the writer says, well, okay, well, how about this question? Is there a purpose or plan, meaning or purpose for the whole big universe cosmos that we see out there? And again, Brian Greene says no. But then he says, but that's okay. And the writer is saying, yeah, it's okay for him because he busies himself studying the little intricacies of the universe. But I think for the average person, that is not okay, because in the real world, out of the ivory tower, in the real world of living and dying and facing pandemics like the coronavirus, yeah, we kind of want to know that there's a meaning or purpose behind everything, or else what's the point? What's the point of life? And so this writer is right on. He sees this inconsistency in Brian Greene. Okay, he goes on. Surely, though, Greene will grant the existence of free will, that first item on the wish list of every freshman year philosophy student who ever lived. Again, Brian Greene, sorry, not a chance. So in other words, Brian Greene is saying his study of physics and the material world lead him to believe that everything is determined and that all of our free will is actually just our inability to understand that every thought we have, every feeling we have, every love, every fear, everything in our life, our opinions, our beliefs, our convictions about everything, they're all determined chemically based on molecules in our brain, which are based on molecules that come from the universe, which are based on the Big Bang explosion 13.8 years ago. So, billion years ago. So, in other words, Brian Greene is saying we are chemically and materially determined to think and feel and believe everything we think and feel and believe, and because of that, there's no meaning or purpose in the universe, and there is no objective moral order to the universe either. So we don't have any morality other than just social construct. We don't have any meaning or purpose, even though we would like there to be. And we don't even have free will because everything's been determined in our brain by chemical forces acting upon us. He says, surely particles are just obeying their quantum mechanical marching orders, Greene says. You have no ability to intercede in that quantum mechanical unfolding. None whatsoever. And the article goes on. But here's the thing about Greene, founder of the World Science Festival, host of multiple TV series of PBS, the author of 5 books, including the blockbuster Elegant Universe. That's the one I talked about. And the just released Until the End of Time. He says it all with such ebullience, such ingenious enthusiasm, that if he told you the whole cold, amoral universe was ending tomorrow, you'd roll with it the way he would, as just one more dramatic chapter in an extraordinary tale in which we all have a precious, if fleeting, role. That's not to say everyone embraces his cosmic views so easily. So he goes on. I'll be frank, Greene says. I have some students come in crying, and they say, this is kind of shaking my world up. Yeah, I would imagine that, because you're getting someone who is an authority, so-called, who is an expert, who is supposed to be the top expert in this field, and he's telling people, but he's not telling them in the popular versions of his material, but he's telling them in his classroom, and he's telling this reporter, he's saying, well, all those things you believe about life, that there's a purpose for your life and that there's meaning and purpose in the universe and that God is there and he has a will and that there are rights and wrongs and moral standards that are objective, not just subjective, and that you think that you have freedom of choice and you can believe things and reject other things based on what you perceive and reasoning and evidence and all that. He says to these young students, guess what? That's all an illusion. You don't have anything like that. It's all just mechanical energy with collision of atoms and molecules, and it's all a part of the universe. You're part of the universe, and you are no different than any other aspect of the cold, impersonal nature out there. Only you have a personality and you have consciousness, but those are all part of the universe also. So you're really not what you think you are. And so he says that some students come in crying. Why? Because he's telling them false things. In other words, Brian Greene has a materialistic, atheistic worldview. And based on the atheistic and materialistic assumptions which he holds and which he conducts his science, he then takes the material world, the atheistic assumptions and the materialistic assumptions that he has when he does science, and then he extends those out into philosophy and theology. And he says, see, we can't detect through science, we can't detect through mathematics and through our testing any meaning and purpose or God or morality in the world, and so there must not be. But see, that's the problem. That's the problem. Brian Greene is trying to take the scientific method and extend it to things that are outside of science and the testing of science. He cannot use the scientific method to test certain things. And so what he's doing is saying, if I can't use the scientific method to test certain things, those certain things don't even exist, which is the fallacy. So in other words, the students who are upset because Brian Greene is really attacking their most fundamental beliefs, they're right to be upset because he's actually trying to recruit them to believe his materialistic worldview. He's trying to recruit them to embrace his atheistic assumptions. And the truth is, that is not necessary. We don't have to embrace his atheism. We don't have to embrace his materialism. We can look at and embrace other assumptions that make more sense, because it makes more sense that the universe is intelligently designed. Because if you look, for example, in my own reading, if you look, for example, at the placement of the planet Earth in its relationship to the sun and its relationship to the other planets and its relationship to the universe as a whole, and if you look at where we are placed, we are strategically placed in one of the best places to be for life to exist. And this is called the anthropic principle. And there are so many different factors that have to be just perfect for us to have life on this planet. And it's extremely curious to notice that we are just in the right place that we need to be to have life on our planet. Now, you can say, well, that's just chance. That's just happenstance. The universe just happened to spit us out, and here we are, and we're really, really, really lucky. Or you can look at that same evidence and go, wow, this shows clearly that there was an intelligent design in our home planet here, Earth, and designed for human life, designed for creatures made in the image of God. So you can build an entirely different narrative based on the same information by simply embracing a different assumption than Brian Greene does. And so I would challenge him and any other atheist to say, look, my atheistic or materialistic worldview is an assumption. And then I go about trying to build a theory around it. But there is another assumption that can be made, and that is we start with God and we build out from there, and everything falls into place. So let's go on with the article. On the day that I saw him, the man who has made himself the master of some of the most abstruse aspects of physics, superstring theory, spatial topography, was instead being mastered by one of the more basic ones, gravity. He was struggling about on crutches, the result of 2 ruptured spinal discs, which can give out over time whether or not you're the kind of person who can explain the attraction between the mass of the earth and the mass of your back. When he makes his way from the desk to couch, he drops down gracefully. Behind him is a whiteboard with a storm of equations written on it. The numbers and glyphs frame his face in a perfect metaphor for the impossibly complex ideas that play out in his mind, then somehow emerge comprehensibly, coherently on the page. So it goes on and it talks about, then at the very end it says, there's a lot of satisfaction in such neat solutions to head-cracking problems. But there is an equivalent neatness to the ostensibly dispiriting conclusions Greene reaches in his books and in his research. That unhappy business of a cold universe, an insentient universe, of the individual as just a quantum contraption, behaving as a product, not of choice, but of probabilities and randomness. So the writer here describes Greene's views as dispiriting conclusions. Well, that's one way to put it. When you're trying to suppress the knowledge of God, which the Bible talks about, the non-believer is trying to suppress the knowledge of God. It's a difficult business to do. It says, it's where the free will thing comes in. The universe is guided by quantum probabilities, and your choices are simply a part of that, the way a local breeze is part of the global weather storm. My feeling, this is Greene, my feeling is that the reductionist, materialist, physicalist approach to the world is the right one. He says, there isn't anything else. These grand mysteries will evaporate over time. So, he is describing his dark, bleak, cold philosophy of life based on his atheistic assumptions. Again, he's coming from a different place, and he's trying to work out that cold, cruel, universal view. Rather than feeling, darn, there's no universal morality, darn, there's no universal consciousness, he says, how wondrous it is that I am able to have this conscious experience and it's nothing more than stuff. Yeah, I don't know if that would be called wonderful. That stuff can produce Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. That stuff can produce the Mona Lisa. That stuff can produce Romeo and Juliet. That's wondrous. The rational physicist with the deeply spiritual brother, who is Hare Krishna, surely meant the holy as just a figure of speech. But if so, he picked an apt one. Okay, so he is trying to put the best spin possible on a very depressing, dark, nihilistic worldview. And I would like to challenge him and all of the people that hold to that dark, nihilistic, bleak, atheistic worldview. Examine your assumptions. Because if you, instead of assuming that there is no God and that there is no creator and that there's no purpose or plan to the universe or for human life, instead of assuming that, try to look at the other point of view, which is there is a God. He is intelligent. He has a plan for the universe. He has a plan for the planet Earth. He has a plan for humanity. And he has a plan for human history. And that he's working out this good plan. So rather than looking out and seeing a dark, cold universe that will someday wind down, end, and all of humanity and all of its memory will be wiped out, no, this is simply a material stage for a grander plan of God. When this universe is all through and done, that will be because God is done with it to achieve a greater plan, which is he has a greater and far more glorious goal in mind than simply a material universe. He has something in store for those who trust in him and who believe in him. And Jesus, when he came to the planet Earth and when he died on the cross, he solved a huge moral problem, which is what is to be done with moral sin. And Jesus says, I will take upon myself on the cross the sins of the world. And for those who trust in me and believe in me, I will grant them not just life, but eternal life. So the eternal life that Christ promises, he is talking about beyond this physical universe. So once you grant that God is the starting point of all philosophy and theology, then things make sense. And so we're not so worried about the fate of this universe because we know that God has a greater plan for humanity than just the physical planet Earth. We will live with God forever in a kingdom that cannot be destroyed, that is not threatened by viruses, that is not threatened by asteroids. Of all things, we have an asteroid coming toward our planet and will pass by our planet also at the same time. So we're not worried about all of these physical material threats because God has a plan, a higher plan for the planet Earth and for humans on the planet Earth. And that is eternal, his eternal kingdom in heaven. And so Brian Greene's outlook is dark, it's depressing, it's nihilistic, it's bleak. No wonder students come crying in his office and saying this makes no sense. It doesn't make sense because he's off and he's wrong on his first assumption, and that is the whole issue of God. And so I would challenge him to re-examine his assumptions and look at the matter of God in a closer manner than he is. Well, I hope that's been a helpful and insightful commentary, and we'll talk to you next time on another edition of Christ in Culture. God bless.